everybody. Welcome to another episode. I'm Mike Monticello.
I'm Michael Crossan.
And I'm Jennifer Stockberger.
So today's going to be one of our world famous All Questions episodes, backed by popular demand.
Oh, yeah.
This is where we're going to spend the entire episode talking about the questions that you folks sent in to us. And of course, the best way to send us those questions is text them to talkingcars@icloud.com. So let's get right into it.
Okay.
And the first question we're going to deal with is from Ed, and he says, so much discussion surrounding EVs raves about the 0 to 60 acceleration times. Clearly that is a carrot for buyers seeking speed for passing and ramp freeway entering, getting out of harm's way, etc. But what about 60 to 0 braking times and stopping distances in these really heavy vehicles weighed down with batteries? How do they compare to ICE internal combustion engine competitors? This should be tested on your track! Exclamation mark.
Exclamation.
Well, the reality is we do, of course. Yes. We do all the same testing with EVs that we do with every vehicle that comes through here, including our panic brake testing, where the tester drives at 60 miles per hour, stomps on the brake pedal as hard as he can. So, Jen, and we did some testing of kind of comparing hybrid stopping distances just a couple of years ago to their non-hybrid counterparts. And we found some interesting things, which was that the hybrids typically stopped a little longer.
Correct.
But it's a little different scenario with the EVs, right, Jen?
Yes. So Ed, we do test it. And interestingly, what I pulled up for this episode is we have some very close pairs. The internal combustion car vehicle versus the EV. And so you're right. Years ago, hybrid cars, we found longer braking distances optimized for rolling resistance without necessarily the countermeasure of silica compounds or things that would improve particularly their wet grip. We are not seeing that same trend with the EVs. So just to talk about some pairs. So Ford F-150 XLT versus the Ford F-150 Lightning. The Lightning weighs about 1,700 pounds more than the F-150 XLT, but it only brakes a couple of feet longer. Kia Niro EV Wind EV weighs 650 pounds more, the EV.
Than the hybrid, than the Niro hybrid.
Yeah. And it only actually has dry braking distances that are shorter.
Right.
And only both wet and dry on that one. Volkswagen Tiguan. Again, we're going back to our test in 2018 versus the VW ID4. Weighs 1,000 pounds more, the ID4 over the Tiguan. Yet is only, again, a couple of feet longer, both dry and wet. So as much as you're correct, Ed, we're absolutely seeing seconds off in terms of acceleration time. We have not seen drastic increases in braking distances, despite the weight. And I think, Mike, maybe you want to weigh in here, partially because these tires have such good accel and so much torque that they have to put tires on that have some grip. Yeah. Or we'd be spinning tires all day long.
Right.
And so we're seeing more performance-oriented tires, which has given us some good
these
braking.
cars they'll hit the tire pretty hard with that instant torque.
Yeah.
So they've got pretty good tire to begin with, and that's going to translate over to braking as well.
Right.
Despite the extra weight. I still sort of wonder, these EVs are so incredibly fast that the brakes don't really match up to the speed. There's like a ratio difference there.
Yeah.
You can get to a corner, we can joke out here on our test track that you get to that corner going really, really fast. You arrive at a high speed to your spin out almost.
Right.
And then of course you have the weight that combines with that. But we are seeing better tires in the car.
Yep.
I have seen larger brakes on some of the EVs. For example, the GV70 versus the electrified GV70 has a much bigger front brake rotor and caliper. So they're trying to combat some of that weight there too.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point, Mike, which is when you look at a specific example such as the Rivian R1T, the pickup,
right,
0 to 60 miles per hour in under 4 seconds, right?
Blistering fast, yeah.
But it does stop better than the Ford F-150 and the Ford F-150 Lightning. But this vehicle is so ridiculously fast, even though it stops okay for full-size pickups.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop like a sports car that can go, what I mean? Like a sports car is going to stop much shorter than that thing. So they don't quite, like you said, they don't
like
quite.
A truck,
yeah.
But it drives like a sports car.
Yeah. They're compared to regular internal combustion engine hybrids, they're doing well, but in terms of sometimes the way they can build speed so quickly, maybe not quite.
And they do it silently.
Yeah.
And you don't actually, I think of, the great example was like the iX, like that was so quick. And like, ooh, you didn't realize how quick you were going.
The BMW iX?
Yeah.
Well,
so anyway, and there's many like that. That's just an example.
Yeah.
But anyway.
But if you do look at the numbers, it is the EVs are stopping generally shorter than, not always,
comparable.
but yes, shorter or comparable to their gas counterparts. So
Great question, Ed.
really good question. And now this one, let's move on to a question from Michael. This one's really, he's trying to throw us for a loop here. He says, if you could take control of an entire vehicle segment to scrap and start over from the ground up, which would it be and why? And I'm going to throw it to you first, Mike.
There's so many choices. I'm going to go with crossovers. They, I don't think they do anything particularly well. They're kind of a compromise happy medium. You know, you get some good headroom and that kind of stuff is comfortable. I think access is pretty good, but you're definitely losing some cargo space. You know, a lot of them have like a coupe-like back. They're definitely not off-road vehicles. They're not cars. They're not sports cars. And, you know, again, some of them can be pretty quick, you know, pretty sporty. So I would have no more crossovers, because if we're going to do something kind of middle of the road anyway, I think we should do it in station wagons that look awesome.
Yeah.
So big naturally aspirated V8s.
After my own heart.
You know, maybe a stick shift, big spring in the back. You could tow with a station wagon. People used to do that back in the day.
Ford Flex.
I love that vehicle. No, actually, I kind of like that vehicle.
Me too. That's why I'm saying it. Yeah.
But yeah, I like station wagons, and I would obliterate the crossovers from the market and just give people station wagons.
I like it.
Wood trim's optional.
I like it. I actually, we'll get to me in a second, but Jen, what did you come up with
So
first?
this may be a repeat of what I've said before, but I would get rid of the entry level luxury. And it often is a crossover. So I'm touching a little bit on what Mike says, because if you listen to what we say time and time again, they're a compromise, but they're an expensive compromise. And we always say, buy the loaded version of the non-luxury brand. Often that's below it.
Yeah.
So we often say that. What I do say, though, is if they were implemented, and again, I'm coming to the ground up part of Mike's question, is if they were implemented different. I think of like the small sedans of a BMW 3 Series, for example, versus a BMW 5 Series. The 3 Series is geared towards an enthusiast. It's small, but it's got a manual and it's got a great powertrain and it's very nimble. What if you took that luxury compact entry level SUV and made it really sporty?
Yeah.
Super powertrain, give him some manuals, give it race inspired seats, and make that a sporty crossover SUV versus just, you got some money, but you probably don't have enough to get the rest of it. And I looked at some numbers. The X1 in 2022, 18,000 units versus an X5, for example, sold 60,000 units. A Lexus UX sold 17,000 units versus an RX sold 115,000 units. Versus the X1, 18,000. The 3 Series sold almost 50,000.
So it sounds like what you're saying is they're not giving people what they want anyway. The entry level luxury SUV isn't.
But make it sporty.
Yeah.
I'm saying
and then they'd sell more of them.
Yes.
And then you know that your plan came
like
true.
The SUVs for they want a little more cargo. They want the height. Make it a sporty SUV instead of just you get some of the benefit, but not all of it, which makes it more of a compromise for the money. Give them something different for that smaller volume and make them all M's, make them all, whatever the Euro.
That sounds good to me. We sound like a bunch of enthusiast gearheads today.
But that's mine.
Yeah. So I actually kind of pretty much agreed with Mike. So folks, sometimes we know what we always know what we're going to talk about, but we don't know what we're individually going to talk about on some of these answers. In this case, we had no idea what each one was going to say.
Right.
And I said, mine was, I don't know about scrapping a particular segment, but I just want to bring back the popularity of the station wagon. And that's what we used to call it back in the day, was a station wagon, not just a wagon. It has a special place in my heart because I grew up with a 1968 Volvo 145 wagon. That was the car that my parents had basically my entire childhood and even into teenage years. 4-speed manual transmission, air conditioning, no radio, only singing.
Oh gosh.
And they just make so much sense. And they're lower to the ground than an SUV, so they handle better. And I think you touched on it, Mike. You said they look great. If you look at some of them over the years, I think of Audi A4 Avant, Volvo V60, Volvo V90, Cadillac CTS V wagon,
Ford
Buick
LTD2 wagon.
No, Buick Regal Tour X.
That's what I drove.
Buick Regal Tour X is one of the most underrated vehicles I think that was ever made.
Yeah, Regal. Yeah.
Volvo 1800 ES is more like a two-door weird wagon thing. And then the king of all wagons, Audi RS6 Avant.
Oh, yeah.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. But what do they call them in Europe? It's not wagon. It's
Estates.
estate. Yes.
Yeah.
Couldn't think of the word.
Yeah. You're so Euro, Jen.
So Euro.
All right.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's our take.
Yeah. And again, like we joke about the Ford Flex, which Mike and I obviously both loved, but it didn't do very well. And I thought it was just such a great
Sales-wise,
balance.
it didn't do well.
Yeah, sales-wise, it didn't.
I will say this: every time I see one on the road, I think of you.
I know you do.
Because she's told us so many times on this podcast how much she loves it.
I did.
And it is a great vehicle because it's a box, so it's so spacious.
Yeah.
Okay, how about another one from Sheila and Tom from Massachusetts? They say, we are snowbirds and leave our car in our garage for 5 to 6 months at a time and are currently considering purchasing a hybrid. Should we be concerned about leaving the hybrid without driving it for this long? I know, Jen, when you hear this, you think snowbirds, you're immediately thinking of the Anne Murray song.
Yeah. Oh, little snowbird, take me with you when you...
There you go. Yeah.
Isn't that it?
We were.
I am so old. Where's the camera?
She's a fantastic, fantastic singer. But we're not going to ask you to sing on this one, Mike. But tell us, like, what's your advice about having a hybrid sitting for months at a time?
There's always a concern with letting any car sit. Hybrid,
I was
EV,
gonna say any vehicle.
internal combustion engine, doesn't really matter. Cars don't really like to sit. They kind of rot away when they sit. But there are things you can do. So my advice for a hybrid is going to basically be the same for any car. First, I'd talk about fuel. We have ethanol, a pretty high ethanol content, 10, maybe 15% ethanol. Ethanol absorbs moisture. It goes bad pretty quick. So I wouldn't fill up the gas tank. I'd actually leave it a whole lot lower.
Okay.
Back in the day, they used to say fill your gas tank so the metal of the tank doesn't rust, but these tanks are all plastic. So I'd rather have less potentially bad gas in the car that I have to deal with later on, when I come back up to my house in the car. Definitely use some type of a fuel additive or stabilizer, in that last tank. So it's in there and it can help preserve that. If you have ethanol-free fuel near where you live, maybe just fill up that last tank with that would be a good choice too. I would still probably use the additive and stabilizer. Beyond that, we got to talk about the battery. You have the larger high voltage hybrid battery, and basically you don't want to, not that you're ever going to get that fully charged because they're still going to only give you about 80%. You want it somewhere in about the 50% range. That's kind of where batteries sort of like to be for longer term storage. But basically just somewhere in that 50% range, it's going to be okay. Then we have a 12-volt battery in the car as well. And that could absolutely go flat in 3 to 6 months. I'm a fan of disconnecting 12-volt batteries if the car is going to sit for a long period of time and you're not going to, periodically maybe have a neighbor come over and start the car up and things like that. So I would disconnect that 12-volt battery. That does another thing too for the high voltage battery. It keeps the contactors open when those are basically the big relay switches that allow the high voltage to leave the battery. So there's no chance that high voltage system will power up. And in theory, it should not really degrade over time. You're going to get a little bit of loss as it sits there. And the other choice, I guess, is if you have a neighbor or somebody who can come over to the house, checking for leaks and maybe your mail, that kind of stuff, just ask them if they're comfortable, firing the car up every couple of weeks out in the driveway, let it run for 15 minutes while they're checking out the house, and then just put it away. That's another option as well. Cars do like to be used.
To be run,
Yeah. But definitely, cars do sit from time to time. And as long as you kind of plan ahead a little bit, it should be okay for you, when you come back to the house.
Yeah.
If you're not comfortable disconnecting and reconnecting a 12-volt battery, maybe there's like a roadside service or a local shop or something to come out to the house and help you out with that. You'd have to pay for that service, but it's better than causing some damage to the car, if you're unsure. So a couple options there.
Two things. One, Jen, I can provide the service that Mike is talking about, coming over and driving your Mustang convertible every once in a while for you to keep it running if you want.
If I were a snowbird. But
And two, I use a battery disconnect device on my Tacoma, which unfortunately doesn't get driven that often. I assume you like those. I mean, because they make it, once you have it set up, then it's just unscrewing a knob, when I'm not going to drive the truck for a little while. And then when I come back to it,
put it
screw it back in. I've never had a problem with that or my Miata. Are you okay with those?
Cases, I am in a lot of cases. The trouble we run into now in a lot of newer cars, gasoline powered cars, hybrids, whatever, there's actually a lot more happening at the top of the battery. And there really isn't room for one of those. Your Tacoma is basically just a couple of posts with
it's 23 years old.
And negative terminal. But I was just basically under the hatch of the Maserati, I'm doing some stuff in with that battery, and there's a bunch of fuses, and there's a pyro device there that severs the battery cable in the event of an accident. There's just a lot of stuff going on there, and they kind of give you a small compartment, and it's all got foam and stuff. There's not a ton of room for that.
So older cars, yes. Newer cars and hybrids,
generally,
maybe
I would
not.
just say disconnect that negative battery cable. for the 6 months, if you're not going to do any kind of intermediate starting.
We were really, really religious. You laugh about starting the Mustang, even though we had a mild winter. This year, we literally went out every week, ran it. It's been so much better. So much better this spring. Yeah.
So you don't need my service. Fine.
I don't.
Whatever.
Sorry.
Okay. Next question comes from David. David says, quick question about your car reliability info. Are these results cumulative for a model year or specific to the calendar year that you conduct the surveys? For example, does the current rating of above average for the 2018 model year reflect all the responses you received for that model year since it first showed up on your surveys, or for the year the survey was conducted? David, that's a great question. We always have questions about the reliability stuff. And of course, I went to our, all things data guy here sometimes on the podcast, Steve Ellick. He's the program leader for automotive data and analytics here. And the short answer is that each year the reliability info is specific to the newest survey year. In other words, each year we ask our members through these surveys if they've had any problems with their vehicles over the last 12 months. And so an above average rating for a 2018 model year is based on not since it's, since it was brand new. It's just based on what happened to them these last 12 months. And then we just update that every year.
Relative to other 2018.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a little different for new cars. So that's used cars, but new cars a little different because we sometimes take into consideration past survey years of data that would only affect the newest model year though. So it can be a little different with the new cars.
Yep.
Okay. This next question comes from Jake Fisher, and I got to be honest, that name sounds really familiar. I can't place why. This person asks, should a Jeep Wrangler be considered a convertible? Why or why not? And of course, we are talking about our very own Jake Fisher, director of auto testing here.
Start putting
I think he's trying to stir up trouble. He's trying to make us argue with each other. So Jen, I'm going to go to you first.
Okay.
Is the Jeep Wrangler a convertible in your opinion? This is not CR's opinion. Right. This is in Jen Stockberg's opinion. Is the Wrangler a convertible? Why or why not?
The answer is no. It is not a convertible in my rules. And the main difference is about safety, and it is the structure. So if you take all the panels off of a Jeep Wrangler or something like a Bronco, for example, you still have the roof structure ribs there. In a crash, rollover, whatever it might be, that roof structure, even though there's no panels there, does provide a certain level of protection. It would be like a roll bar in a racing vehicle. That roof structure has to maintain roof crush numbers. It has to do all that. If you look at a traditional convertible, think of a Mustang or a Miata or something like that, there is nothing over that occupant's head. And to me, that's what separates a panel off-road vehicle like a Wrangler or a Bronco from a true convertible.
Mike?
I say it is not a convertible.
Okay. No, he agreed with you.
Yeah,
he does.
And basically, not from the safety aspect of things, but it's been pretty new that a Wrangler actually has a folding section of that top. Mm-hmm. And convertible tops fold, whether it's power or you manually fold them. You've always had to unsnap and zip and remove the top, or in the case of the Bronco, panels.
Right.
So in my mind, that's more like a speedster, where the roof either no roof or the whole roof just comes off and you're out on the road and you have no recourse. If it starts to rain, you're just going to get wet. Yeah. So in my mind, the Jeep Wrangler is a speedster. I guess would be my takeaway on that.
Unless you've stored all those panels very carefully somewhere. Yeah.
So according to my trusty Road and Track Automotive Dictionary, those of you that know I worked at Road and Track for 10 years a while back. So their dictionary says convertible refers to the ability to readily convert the car from closed to open and vice versa. A car is said to be a full convertible if, when open, it has no ancillary structures above the belt line other than the windshield, which I think is exactly what you said. Yep. So, so the answer is, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you think about something like a Miata, right, it's so, with the soft top, you put that up in a couple seconds.
It back, and reach it.
Yeah. So nice try stirring up trouble, Jake Fisher. Better luck next time.
Yeah.
All right. How about another question here from Jim? Jim says, my question is about the need for automatic transmission vehicles to have the wheels turned towards the curb when parking on hills. I have a 2010 automatic transmission SUV, and I rarely concern myself with blocking the wheel against the curb, whereas I have a neighbor with a 2022 vehicle who always does so. I can see the need for manual transmission vehicles to do this. Is it necessary for automatic transmission vehicles? I mean, you know, if you lived in a city, or especially a hilly city, you've seen some people parking like that with their wheels, their tires toward the curb, other people not. And Mike, what is the real answer? Is it a automatic versus manual thing, or is it something different entirely?
I think in this case, on a hill, it's just good practice to turn those tires towards the curb. It's kind of your last result. If other things fail, you'd like to have something that could maybe catch the car. Basically, when you put the car, an automatic, in park, there's a little metal hook that drops down. It's called a pawl, a P-A-W-L. And basically, the whole weight of the vehicle is now resting on this little piece of metal. It's basically locking the output shaft so your drive wheels can't turn. If anyone's ever parked like nose down on a hill, you put the car in park and it lurches forward and catches, that's the parking paw.
Okay.
And they can skip, they can break the case of the transmission. You also run into, when you want to get that car out of the spot, you're really pulling on the shifter because you're overcoming the weight of the vehicle against that paw to release it and put it in reverse, let's say. So I would say the move is, when you're parking on the hill, keep your foot on the brake, set your parking brake, and your parking brake should hold the vehicle. If it doesn't, it needs to be fixed, it needs to be adjusted. A lot of places have safety checks, and that's part of the thing. Some states where we are in Connecticut, we have emissions, we don't have safety. I sort of wish we did, because some cars are scary out there. Set that parking brake, lift your foot off the service brake, and then it should hold the vehicle. Put the car in park, and then I think, as just a sort of insurance policy, turn that wheel toward the curb, because what if? What if you get bumped by somebody parallel parking behind you? That could overcome the parking brake, the parking paw, whatever. I'd rather have my car where it is than down the hill, you know, when I come back from doing what I'm doing.
Because what does it hurt, right? What's the downside?
Yeah. And my understanding had nothing to do with transmission at all, but just that it would turn, even if there was nobody behind you on a hill, that it would
absolutely
not send it down the hill or face down the hill, but that it would just turn it in towards the curb.
It basically just takes
not
care
even
of itself.
A chuck, but take care of itself.
And cars do break, things do fail, stuff happens out on the road. And I just say better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go. All right. This question comes from Paul. And Paul says, apparently the 2023 Toyota Crown uses a very thin engine oil, OW-8. Is using an oil this thin really for improved gas mileage, or just planned obsolescence? I like the little humor there, Paul.
Yeah.
So Mike, what is going on with that? What's Toyota doing here with the Crown?
So this is new for the Crown. We saw this when you open the hood on our Toyota Crown. There's a sticker very prominent on the top of the radiator that says 0W-8 motor oil. And I did some looking into that. When we bought our car, we got, I think might have been the first one in the state of Connecticut that was sold. I called a local Toyota dealership, and I just wanted to see the oil. That's a very thin oil, and in my mind, it was going to pour like water, so I just kind of want to get my hands on it. They weren't even aware that there was a 0W-8 motor oil to start with. So I let the local Toyota dealer know that. They were able to finally get some in. It took a while, and I've sort of been playing around with it a little bit. It sounds like water when you shake the quart of it. Right now, you can basically only get it at Toyota. If you go to like any auto parts store,
$75 a quart. No, not
that much. It's a little pricey. It's about $20 a quart, which is a little more than like regular Toyota oil, but if you're ever used to Mercedes, BMW, that's in line with what they charge for it. But this oil is very thin. And what they're claiming is, I read some Society of Automotive Engineer documents on this oil, and they're claiming that it is a 0.8% increase in fuel economy over the 0W-16 motor oil, which is still very thin to begin with. But BMW is running a 012. A lot of companies are running a 016. So they're all moving in this direction. And basically, the oil just takes effort to move through the motor. So the thinner the oil is, the less energy we use moving oil, the more of our energy can be moved or used moving the vehicle down the road. And that's better for fuel economy and emissions. I don't think it's planned obsolescence. This stuff is pretty thin, though. It was kind of interesting to play around with. It pours at room temperature very much like regular motor oil. But I put a couple of quarts in the freezer. And what I love about Consumer Reports is they've been in there for like a week, and nobody asks why are there 2 quarts of motor oil in the freezer. But when I pour those, the 5W30, which is a very common grade of oil, it pours like cold honey, if you've ever had honey in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
But the 0W-8 still pretty much pours like a liquid. And that's definitely a consideration. You know, these motors have such tight tolerances. The machine work is so fine that we need a really thin film of oil. I think Toyota just, you know, they're all in on the hybrid, it seems. They've been doing it for a long time. They're pretty good at it. And they're just trying to get that last little bit is what I take away from it. Anyway.
This sounds like this thin motor oil is still relatively new. Have you heard, right? Is that correct? Have you heard anything potentially bad about it?
There's not enough of it out there, really.
Okay. Too early to tell.
Yeah, you can't get it at like the neighborhood parts store. I've called around, nobody has it. They say they can get me 016. They usually don't even have that on the shelf. Basically, Toyota, you can get it from, and there's a couple of, I'll call them higher end sort of motorsport oils, like Motul has it available. It looks like maybe Royal Purple is coming out with it here soon too, or if it's not out already, but it's just not readily available. So if you went to an oil change place,
that's what I was just gonna say. Don't be surprised if your Valvoline or your Jiffy Lube or
they
doesn't
might not
have it. Yeah. That's what I was gonna say.
In the Crown Owner's Manual, it actually says if you can't get the 0W-8, you can run 0W-16. But it doesn't even say change it at your next oil change. It says change it as soon as possible. Where a lot of times it will say your next oil change. If you had to add a quart or something like that. So this is new. I suspect we'll probably start to see this in some more Toyotas and maybe even some other manufacturers as well.
So just logistically, worth it for somebody who owns a Crown to get some, or I would schedule their oil change ahead.
Definitely plan ahead.
Yeah.
You don't want to go into that blind. You don't want to have the oil drained and find out that you can't get the oil, or you can't get the oil in a couple of days.
Yep.
The Toyotas come with Toyota Care, so the first couple of services are going to be covered at the dealer anyway, so they should have it on hand.
Yeah.
But if you service at a dealer that's not high volume, I would definitely at least bring that up before it gets serviced.
Yeah.
Maybe they haven't sold a Crown, or they've only sold one Crown at that point. The new Prius that we just got doesn't take this oil. It's on 0W-16, which is a little bit more conventional is what we've seen.
Yeah.
But I just feel like with increased fuel economy standards and emission standards, they're looking for every advantage they can get. And oil is just one of the places they can get that advantage.
Eking out every bit of fuel economy.
Well, there you go. So that's going to do it for this All Questions episode. Hopefully we gave some good answers there. If you want to learn more about the topics that we talked about, you can click on the links in the show notes. Don't forget to send those questions, comments, 30-second video clips to talkingcars@icloud.com, including if you freeze oil for no reason in your freezer.
There was a reason.
Drop us a line. Tell us that you do that too, just like Mike Crossan.
I just went by to the Snickers, the frozen Snickers.
Delicious. Absolutely delicious.
Absolutely.
And remember, folks, we love those video questions. So text us those 30-second video clips to talkingcars@icloud.com. This episode was produced by Dave Abrams and edited by Anatoly Shumsky. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see y'all next week.